Despite being in beta, Dark and Darker already boasts 6 classes with another 2 in development. As a result, players enjoy a vast array of characters and playstyles to choose from. Or do they? With classes able to choose only 2 active skills, do all of Dark and Darker's classes provide enough utility to merit inclusion in competitive 3-man parties? Before we answer the question, let's begin by defining the phrase class utility within the context of Dark and Darker. A class's utility refers to the breadth and frequency of options and actions available to any class. Typically, classes with more utility are considered to have higher skill ceilings and provide better support to their group than classes with low utility. Now let's set a framework to better classify and objectively analyze the classes and their utility within Dark and Darker. I like to keep things simple, so I chose 2 classifications to describe them: magic classes and martial classes. Magic classes have access to spells, and martial classes cannot use spells. This is a basic delineation, but even Dungeons & Dragons uses these terms. Let's address magic users first. Only the cleric and wizard have access to the spell memory skill, which allows the user to memorize up to 5 spells that they can use in the dungeon. Consequently, they have access to a total of 10 spells because you can take spell memory twice. Realistically though, most players take 1 spell memory skill and judgment or meditation for a total of 5 spells in 1 skill. That said, we already begin to see an element of class identity which only magic users enjoy: skill variety and high class utility. Because magic classes can use 2 or 3 spell slots to choose their best spells for their respective classes, they are able to remain powerful while also having access to utility spell slots. Think of Bless from clerics and Haste from wizards. Additionally, having access at any time to 5 spells makes playing classes a dynamic experience because those classes can respond to many different situations with the appropriate spell. It is this dynamism which lends itself to Dark and Darker's magic classes having strong class utility. Solidifying this, both the cleric and wizard are the only classes which have access to their respective magic schools. Wizards are the only class able to cast fireballs. Clerics are the only class able to heal other characters. Effectively, there is currently no other way to access this breadth of utility, so spell users end up being a near-mandatory pick within many competitive 3-man parties. Now let's talk about the martial classes: Barbarian, Fighter, Rogue, and Ranger. Martial classes do not have access to anything like the spell memory skill. They get to choose 2 skills, and most of the skills which they have access to offer low utility and are just variations on applying additional damage over and above mouse one weapon attacks. Essentially, martial classes are the exact opposite of a dynamic class in that they are all built to do damage, but just in slightly different ways. The result is that your party can have a fighter, or a barbarian, or a ranger, or a rogue, and roughly be just as effective with any one of those classes. Martial classes just don't bring unique enough skills and perks to require their mandatory participation in a party. Thus, I argue that martial classes generally have weak class utility because one martial class essentially replaces the other. That said, the Barbarian, Rogue, and Ranger suffer even further from weak class utility because of the existence of fighters who take the Weapon Mastery perk. Because the fighter can do 90% of what the other martial classes can do, and sometimes do it even better, all martial classes are effectively summed up against the fighter, and their class identity becomes a degree of comparison to the fighter. Take rogues for example. Outside of the hide ability, rogues are objectively squishy fighters. Take rangers for example. Outside of bear traps and quickfire, rangers are fighters with severely worse melee combat. In this way, I would argue that the jack-of-all-trades fighter actually has the strongest class utility within the martial classification because of the breadth of utility they provide by being both a DPS and tank class with a self-heal, and come the closest to being a mandatory pick within a competitive 3-man composition. Now, the title of this video claims there is a problem with all of this, and you may have already spotted it. My argument is that classes with more utility offer a more unique and mandatory experience within a 3-man party. Just look at the 3 classes I identified as having the strongest class utility: Cleric, Wizard, Fighter. Arguments definitely already exist for this trio to be one of the strongest teams across both PvE and PvP combat. Now, Iron Mace has assured us that they will continue to add and balance class and class features as game development continues. However, going forward, my concern regarding this subject is twofold. 1. That as Iron Mace continues adding martial classes, most martial classes will not have the variety and utility to merit addition to most competitive 3-man parties. Why? Because they only have access to 2 skills, and those skills likely don't provide enough utility in comparison to just bringing a fighter with sprint and second wind. And 2, because magic classes effectively have 3 times as many skills as martial classes, magic classes will continue to be in higher demand in 3-man parties because they offer the additional utility required to shore up the party's weaknesses. Now, I know that Iron Mace has already alluded to additional weapons and consumables, which may increase the utility of martial classes. Clearly, I hope they add enough content to give them equal utility to that of spell users. What do you think? Do all the current classes have a place within competitive 3-man parties? Or does a lack of class utility make some classes unviable? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. See you in the dungeon!